I still remember the sound of the clock that night. It wasn't loud, but in that quiet house, every second felt heavy. Tick, tick, tick. It was Christmas night, and I was sitting alone at the dining table, staring at 3 empty chairs that used to mean everything to me. The food was cold, the tree lights were still on, and my phone hadn't buzzed once. I kept telling myself not to overthink it. Kids grow up. They make plans. They have their own lives. That's what I told myself while the turkey dried out and the candles burned down to nothing. But deep inside, I knew something was wrong. My kids had promised they would come. Not hinted. Not maybe. They promised. They said, "Dad, we'll be there. Don't worry." So I cooked like I always did. I cleaned like I always did. I set the table like I always did. And then I waited. At first, I checked the time casually. 6:30, then 7, then 8. I sent one message. Just one. "Everything okay?" No reply. I told myself their phones were dead. Traffic was bad. Something small had delayed them. I kept finding excuses because the truth felt too painful to touch. By 9 o'clock, the house felt colder. Not from the weather, from the silence. I turned off the TV because the laughter from the Christmas movies felt wrong. I didn't want fake joy filling a room that already felt empty. I sat there with my hands folded, staring at the door like a fool, hoping I'd hear footsteps or laughter or even arguing. Anything. But the door never opened. At 10, I finally stood up and began putting the food away. Each container felt heavier than it should have. Every lid I closed felt like I was sealing away another memory. I didn't cry. Not yet. Men like me don't cry easily. We store things away. We tell ourselves we're fine. We swallow pain and call it strength. But when I carried the plates to the sink and saw 3 untouched settings, something cracked inside my chest. I remembered when they were little, how they used to fight over who sat closest to me, how they would sneak cookies before dinner and laugh when I pretended not to see, how Christmas used to be loud and messy and alive. Now it was just me, a 56-year-old man standing in a quiet kitchen, realizing he didn't know where he fit anymore. Around midnight, I turned off the tree lights. The room went dark, except for the glow from the street lamp outside. I sat on the couch and stared at my phone again. Still nothing. No apology. No explanation. Not even a simple message saying they weren't coming. That hurt more than being alone. Because being forgotten feels worse than being lonely. I went to bed without brushing my teeth. Without changing my clothes. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak like it was breathing without me. I wondered what I had done wrong. I replayed every argument. Every moment I raised my voice. Every time I chose work over being home early. Parents don't get a manual. We just do our best and hope it's enough. That night, it didn't feel like it had been. Sometime before dawn, I finally drifted into a shallow sleep. The kind where your body rests, but your mind never does. And then my phone rang. Not a message, not a notification, a call. At 5:42 in the morning. I remember sitting up too fast, my heart pounding like it already knew something my mind didn't. My hands were shaking when I picked up the phone. I expected one of my kids. Instead, I heard a stranger's voice. And in that moment, I understood that Christmas night wasn't the worst part of my story. It was only the beginning. Before my house became quiet, it was once too loud to think. That feels strange to say now, sitting alone most nights with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. But there was a time when silence was something I dreamed of, not something I feared. I had 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. Back then, I used to say my house ran on noise and spilled milk. Someone was always calling my name. Someone was always fighting over the bathroom. Someone was always hungry 5 minutes after dinner. I didn't know then how much I would miss all of it. Their mother, my wife, passed away when the kids were still young. That was the first crack in our family, though I didn't understand it that way at the time. I just knew that suddenly everything depended on me. The cooking, the homework, the rides to school, the comfort when nightmares came. I was grieving, but I didn't allow myself to feel it fully. I thought if I stayed busy enough, the pain would stay quiet. So I worked more hours. I volunteered for overtime. I told myself I was being responsible. In reality, I was tired and afraid. My oldest son, Mark, became quiet after his mother died. He was only 12, but he tried to act older than he was. He stopped asking for help. He stopped talking about his feelings. I thought that meant he was strong. Now I know it meant he was lonely. My middle child, James, reacted differently. He became angry at everything. Doors slammed. Homework went unfinished. Teachers called. I punished him when I should have listened. My daughter, Lily, was the youngest. She clung to me like I was the last solid thing in her world. She slept in my bed for months after her mother died. Every night, she asked the same question. Dad, are you going to leave too? I always said no, but I didn't realize how often I left in other ways. Mornings were chaos. I burned toast. I forgot permission slips. I yelled when we were late. At night, I fell asleep on the couch with paperwork on my chest and guilt in my heart. I thought love meant providing, keeping the lights on, keeping food on the table, keeping them safe. I didn't understand that love also meant presence. There were moments, though, that felt right. Saturday mornings when we all slept in. Movie nights with popcorn all over the floor. Road trips where we sang badly and laughed too hard. Those moments are what I hold on to now. As the years passed, the kids grew. They changed in ways I didn't always notice. Their voices got deeper. Their interests shifted. Their worlds expanded beyond our small house. And I stayed the same. I still expected family dinners. Still expected holidays together. Still expected closeness to happen naturally, like it always had. But closeness takes work, and I didn't realize how far behind I was falling. When Mark left for college, I told him I was proud. I meant it, but I didn't tell him I was scared. I didn't tell him I didn't know who I was without him around. James followed a different path. He struggled. He bounced between jobs. He blamed me for being too strict. I blamed him for not trying hard enough. We argued more than we talked. Lily stayed close the longest. She called me every day when she first moved out. She told me about her classes, her friends, her dreams. I listened, but not deeply enough. Life kept moving, and I kept assuming we would always find our way back to each other. Then came the small changes. Missed calls, short replies, holidays that needed to be rescheduled. I noticed them, but I didn't confront them. I didn't want to be the needy parent. I didn't want to admit I felt left behind. So I smiled. I said I understood. I told myself this was normal. Years passed like that. Not with a fight. Not with a big betrayal. Just with distance. I remember the last Christmas we spent together before everything changed. They were all there, but not really. Phones in their hands. Conversations half finished. Laughter that felt polite instead of warm. I noticed it. I just didn't know what to do about it. After that, holidays became complicated. Schedules conflicted. Excuses piled up. I was always the one adjusting. Still, I believed in family. I believed that no matter what, Christmas would bring us back together. That belief is what made the night they didn't come hurt so much. Because it wasn't just about one holiday. It was about years of quiet moments I didn't fight hard enough to protect. As I look back now, I see where things slipped. Not all at once, but slowly, like sand falling through open fingers. I love my kids. I still do. That was never the problem. The problem was that I thought love alone would be enough. And I didn't realize how much time I was losing until time was already gone. I didn't wake up one morning and realize my kids were slipping away from me. That's not how it happened. If it had been sudden, maybe I would have reacted differently. Maybe I would have fought harder. But distance doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, disguised as normal life. At first, it looked harmless. Mark stopped calling every week and switched to texting. Short messages. Simple replies. Busy right now, Dad. I'll call later. Later rarely came. I told myself he was young and focused on his future. That was a good thing. That's what parents are supposed to want. So I swallowed the small ache I felt and smiled whenever his name lit up my phone, even if the message was only 2 words long. James was harder. He carried resentment like a weight he never set down. Every conversation with him felt tense, like one wrong word could turn it into an argument. When I asked about work, he heard judgment. When I offered advice, he heard criticism. I didn't know how to talk to him without making things worse. Lily was the one I worried about most. She still called, but something in her voice had changed. She sounded tired, distracted, sometimes sad. When I asked what was wrong, she said she was fine. I let that answer end the conversation more times than I should have. I thought I was respecting her space. I didn't realize I was teaching her that her feelings weren't welcome. The first real crack came on a random Sunday afternoon. James had come over unannounced. That alone should have told me something was wrong. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, tapping his fingers like he was trying to work up the courage to say something. I asked him if he wanted coffee. He shook his head. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Dad," he said, "do you ever think you were too hard on us?" The question caught me off guard. I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. "Hart," I said. "I gave you everything." His jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant." I felt defensive before I felt curious. That's one of my regrets. I jumped straight to protecting myself instead of listening. "I worked my whole life for you," I said. "I did what I had to do." James stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "That's always your answer," he said. "Work, responsibility, sacrifice. But you were never there when we actually needed you." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind him of every bill I paid, every night I stayed up worrying. Instead, I stayed quiet. He left without saying goodbye. That was the first time I felt afraid. Not angry, afraid. After that, conversations became careful, measured, like we were all walking on thin ice, pretending it wasn't cracking beneath our feet. Mark stopped coming home as often. He said travel was expensive. School was demanding. I never questioned him. Lily started spending holidays with her friends' families. She said it felt easier. Less pressure. That word stayed with me. Pressure. I didn't realize my expectations had become heavy, that my desire to keep the family together felt like a burden instead of comfort. One night, I tried to talk to Mark about it. We were on the phone, and the conversation felt strained, like we were both waiting for it to end. "I miss you," I said. It came out softer than I intended. There was a pause. Then he sighed. "I know, Dad," he said. "But you have to understand, I can't live my life around your loneliness." That sentence still echoes in my head. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just said I understood. But I didn't. Loneliness wasn't something I chose. It wasn't something I wanted to place on anyone else. It was simply there, growing quietly in the spaces where my kids used to be. I started filling my days with routines. Same breakfast. Same walks. Same grocery store. Familiar things felt safer than conversations that might hurt. James stopped answering my calls for weeks at a time. When he finally did, his voice sounded guarded. "I need space," he said. I gave it to him. Too much of it. Lily's calls became shorter. Sometimes she didn't call at all. When I asked if I'd done something wrong, she said no. But her silence felt louder than any accusation. There was one night I remember clearly. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing exploded. But something inside me shifted. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through old photos on my phone. Pictures of birthdays, school plays, messy kitchens, and smiling faces. I realized how few recent photos there were. How much time had passed since we were all in the same room. That's when it hit me. I had been assuming my kids would always come back. That family ties were automatic, permanent. But relationships don't survive on memory alone. They need care. They need humility. They need hard conversations. And I had avoided those. I thought being calm meant being loving. I thought giving space meant being respectful. But sometimes love needs courage. I didn't confront the distance because I was afraid of what I might hear. Afraid they would confirm what I already suspected, that I hadn't been the father they needed. The next Christmas, we planned a small gathering. Nothing fancy, just dinner. Mark said maybe. James didn't respond. Lily said she'd try. I cooked anyway. I always cooked anyway. That night, only Lily showed up. She hugged me, but it felt careful, like she was holding back. During dinner, she barely ate. She stared at her plate like it held answers she couldn't say out loud. Finally, she spoke. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you ever feel like you don't really know us anymore?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I knew her better than anyone. Instead, I felt the truth rise in my throat. "I'm trying," I said. She nodded, but her eyes filled with tears. "Trying isn't the same as listening," she said. After she left, I sat at the table alone and cried for the first time in years. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears that soaked into my shirt while the dishes sat untouched. That was when I realized something important. My kids weren't punishing me. They weren't being cruel. They were protecting themselves. And I didn't know how to reach them anymore. I wish I could say I fixed things then, that I changed immediately, that I found the right words. But life doesn't work like that. I stayed quiet. They stayed distant. And somewhere in that silence, we all became strangers who shared the same last name. There is a moment in every broken relationship when silence stops being peaceful and starts being dangerous. I didn't realize I had crossed into that moment until it was already too late. For a long time, I believed distance was temporary, that people drift and then return, that family has a gravity strong enough to pull everyone back eventually. But gravity only works when something is still holding on. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. James. His name on my phone startled me so much that I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad," he said, without greeting. "I need to talk to you." I could hear something tight in his voice. Not anger. Something colder. I told him to come over. When he arrived, he didn't sit down. He stood in the living room, arms crossed, looking around like he was visiting a stranger's house. "I'm not staying long," he said. I nodded. I already felt the weight in my chest. "I've been talking to Mark and Lily," he said. "They feel the same way I do." That sentence scared me more than yelling ever could. "About what?" I asked. James exhaled slowly, like he was choosing each word carefully. "About you," he said. "About growing up. About how things were." I felt my defenses rise instantly. Old habits. Old armor. "I did my best," I said. "I wasn't perfect, but—" "That's the problem," he interrupted. "You always stop there. You always end the conversation before it actually starts." I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. Something in his expression told me this wasn't a discussion. It was a statement. "You weren't cruel," he continued. "You weren't abusive. I'm not saying that. But you were absent, even when you were home." I felt myself shrinking inward. Every instinct told me to explain, to defend, to list reasons. Instead, I asked a question I had never dared to ask before. "How?" James looked surprised, then tired. "You never asked how we were really doing," he said. "You asked about grades, about work, about results, but never about how we felt." I thought about Lily asking if I would leave too, about Mark going quiet, about James slamming doors. I had noticed the signs. I just hadn't understood them. "We were kids," James said. "We needed you. Not your paycheck. Not your rules. You." The room felt smaller. The air felt heavy. "I can't change the past," I said quietly. "No," he replied. "But you could at least acknowledge it." I nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," I said. The word felt small. Too small. James stared at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "That's not enough," he said. Those 3 words hurt more than anything else he said that day. He left without another word. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, replaying the conversation over and over. I wondered how many times I had ended things with a sentence that made sense to me, but felt empty to my kids. I thought about calling Mark. About calling Lily. I didn't. I was afraid. The next contact didn't come directly. It came through silence. Mark stopped responding altogether. Lily's messages became formal. Polite. Careful. Weeks passed. Then Lily called. "Dad," she said softly. "We need to talk." She came over on a Sunday morning. She looked older than I remembered. More guarded. She sat across from me and held her hands together tightly. "I love you," she said. "I need you to know that first." I nodded, unable to speak. "But loving you has been painful," she continued. "And I can't keep pretending it hasn't been." She told me things I didn't know. Things she never said growing up. How she felt invisible. How she learned not to ask for comfort because I always seemed tired. How she stopped sharing her dreams because my advice always felt like correction. "I know you didn't mean to hurt us," she said. "But intent doesn't erase impact." That sentence changed me. I asked questions. Real ones. And for the first time, I didn't interrupt. I listened. When she left, I felt hollow. Like everything I thought I understood had been stripped away. I wanted to fix things. Immediately. I wanted to prove I could be different. So I did what I always did. I tried to act. I started calling more. Texting more. Asking questions. But timing matters. And I was late. Mark finally responded with a long message. "I need distance," he wrote. "I'm not ready to rebuild anything yet." James didn't respond at all. That was when panic set in. I started imagining futures where holidays stayed empty. Where birthdays passed without calls. Where I became a story they told without me in it. Fear makes people desperate. And desperation makes mistakes. I showed up unannounced at James's place. He opened the door and looked stunned. "This isn't okay," he said. "I just want to talk," I replied. "I already told you I need space." "I'm your father," I said, without thinking. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew they were wrong. James's face hardened. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You use that like a shield. Like it excuses everything." He stepped back. "Please leave," he said. I stood there for a moment, then turned and walked away. I sat in my car and cried until my chest hurt. Not because he rejected me, but because he was right. I had confused authority with connection, responsibility with presence. The final break came weeks later. Christmas plans were discussed in a group message. Mark said he would be traveling. James said nothing. Lily said she didn't know yet. I typed and erased messages over and over. Finally, I wrote, "I'd really like us to be together." No response. Then Lily replied privately. "Dad," she wrote, "we're not doing this to punish you. We're just tired." That was the moment I understood. They weren't pulling away to hurt me. They were pulling away to heal. And I was standing in the way. So I stopped pushing. I stopped calling. Stopped reminding. Stopped asking. I let the silence exist. It hurt more than anything I had ever felt. But somewhere inside that pain was a small understanding. Love doesn't mean holding on tighter. Sometimes it means letting go. And that decision led directly to the Christmas night when no one came. The night that forced me to finally face the cost of everything I hadn't listened to. There is a kind of loneliness that comes from being alone. And then there is another kind that comes from knowing the people you love are alive, nearby, and choosing distance. The second one is harder to live with. After I stopped reaching out, the days stretched longer than I expected. I had told myself I was doing the right thing, giving them space, respecting boundaries. That's what good parents do, right? But good intentions don't make empty rooms feel warmer. Mornings became the hardest. I would wake up early, like I always had, even though there was nowhere I needed to be. No lunches to pack, no schedules to remember, just quiet. I'd make coffee for one and sit at the kitchen table, staring at the chair Lily used to sit in when she was little. She always swung her legs back and forth, humming softly while she ate cereal. I used to tell her to sit still. Now I would give anything to hear that humming again. The house felt different without expectation. Before, even when my kids didn't come, I was still waiting for them. Now, there was nothing to wait for. I stopped cooking big meals. Started eating simpler things. Toast, soup, food that didn't require effort or hope. I told myself it was practical. But deep down, I knew I didn't want to face leftovers meant for more than one person. Friends asked how my kids were doing. I said they were busy. I smiled. I changed the subject. There are some failures you don't know how to say out loud. Nights were worse. I'd sit on the couch with the TV on low, not really watching anything. Just letting sound fill the space so my thoughts wouldn't get too loud. But they always did. I replayed moments over and over. The times I dismissed their feelings. The times I chose work instead of listening. The conversations I ended too early because they made me uncomfortable. Regret is strange. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up in ordinary moments. When you reach for your phone and realize there's no one to call. When you hear laughter outside and remember how it used to sound inside your own walls. I tried to distract myself. I took longer walks. I organized the garage. I donated old clothes. I even tried volunteering at a local food pantry, thinking maybe helping others would quiet the ache. It helped a little, but when I came home, the silence was still there, waiting. I started writing things down. Not letters I planned to send, just thoughts, things I wished I had said, apologies I never voiced, questions I never asked. One night, I wrote, I thought being strong meant not needing anyone. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Strength had been my shield, my excuse. I didn't cry in front of my kids because I thought I had to be solid, unbreakable, but maybe what they needed was someone willing to break with them. Weeks passed, then months. Holidays came and went quietly. Birthdays were marked by cards I didn't know if they'd read. I sent gifts anyway. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, just reminders that I was still there. I never asked if they arrived. I didn't want to know. The loneliness deepened into something heavier. Not sadness exactly, something closer to grief. Grief for a relationship that hadn't ended, but had changed beyond recognition. There were days I felt angry at myself. Days I felt defensive. Days I wanted to call them and say they were being unfair. But anger faded faster than regret. I remembered something my wife once said, years ago, during a rare argument. She said, "You think love is quiet endurance. But sometimes love needs to be loud." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I did. I had endured silently, worked, provided, stayed steady, but I hadn't shown vulnerability. I hadn't let my kids see me unsure, afraid, human. And by the time I realized that, they were already grown. I started noticing how age was changing me. Not dramatically, just subtly. My knees hurt more. My reflection looked more tired. Time felt heavier. I wondered how much of their lives I would see from a distance. One afternoon, I ran into an old neighbor at the grocery store. She asked about my kids. I hesitated, then said honestly, "We don't talk much these days." She nodded gently. "You're not alone," she said. "Families don't drift because people stop caring. They drift because people stop knowing how to talk." That stayed with me. I thought about reaching out again. Not to fix, not to explain, just to listen. But fear held me back. What if they didn't want to talk? What if my voice brought more pain? Sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when your presence helps and when it hurts. Then came December. I told myself I wouldn't expect anything. I told myself Christmas was just another day. But that wasn't true. I decorated anyway. Not much. Just the tree. I didn't cook big meals. I didn't plan. Still, hope has a way of sneaking in. Lily sent a short message. "Not sure about Christmas yet." I replied, "No pressure. I love you." That was all. Mark didn't message. James didn't message. On Christmas Eve, I sat alone and wrapped gifts that might never be opened. Simple things. Books. Scarves. Things that said, "I thought of you." Christmas morning came quietly. I drank coffee by the window and watched snow fall. It was beautiful. Painfully so. By evening, the hope I had tried to suppress had fully surfaced. I cooked anyway. That's the thing about parents. Even when you know better, your heart prepares for your children. And then came the night they didn't come. The night I finally stopped telling myself stories. The night I accepted that love doesn't guarantee closeness. That regret doesn't wait for permission. That time does not pause for understanding. And when I went to bed that night, alone, surrounded by reminders of a life I once had, I believed that was the lowest point. I was wrong. Because the phone call that came at dawn would show me that loneliness was only part of what I had to face. The phone ringing at dawn didn't sound like any other call I had ever received. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent in the usual way. But something about it felt wrong the moment it cut through the quiet. I was half asleep, caught between dreams and memory, when the sound pulled me back into the room. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw the faint glow of morning light creeping through the curtains, and I remembered. Christmas night. The empty house. The silence. I reached for the phone with a hand that already felt unsteady. I expected to see one of my kids' names. Some delayed apology. Some last-minute explanation. Instead, it was an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Something told me not to. "Hello," I said, my voice rough with sleep. There was a pause on the other end. Then a man spoke. "Is this Mr. Harris?" he asked. "Yes," I said. My heart was already beating faster. "This is Officer Reynolds," he said. "I'm calling regarding your son." The word son landed like a weight on my chest. "Which one?" I asked, immediately hating myself for needing to ask. "James," he said. I sat up so fast the room spun. "What happened?" I asked. My voice sounded calm, but I felt like I was falling. "There's been an accident," the officer said. "He's alive, but he's at the hospital." Alive. That was the only word I heard clearly. "Is he okay?" I asked. There was another pause. Longer this time. "He's stable," the officer said carefully. "But it's serious." I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember putting on my shoes. I don't remember how I got into the car. I only remember driving through empty streets, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. The world felt unreal, like I was watching myself from the outside. At every red light, I thought about James as a child. The way he laughed too loudly. The way he got frustrated when he couldn't explain what he was feeling. I thought about the last words we said to each other. About how cold they sounded now. The hospital was quiet when I arrived. Too quiet. A nurse met me at the desk and asked my name. She looked at her screen, then at me, her expression softening. "This way," she said. Walking down that hallway felt longer than any distance I had ever traveled. Every step echoed. Every breath felt shallow. I stopped outside a room with James's name on the door. I stood there longer than I should have, afraid of what I might see, afraid of what I might feel. When I finally opened the door, the sight of him took my breath away. He looked smaller, fragile. Machines surrounded him. Tubes. Monitors. I stood frozen, unsure where to put my hands. Unsure if I was allowed to be there. Then he stirred slightly. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he looked confused. Then he saw me, and something in his expression shifted. Not anger. Not relief. Something closer to surrender. "Dad," he whispered. That one word broke something inside me. I stepped closer, carefully, like I was approaching something fragile that might disappear if I moved too fast. "I'm here," I said. He swallowed. His voice was weak. "I didn't know who else to call," he said. Those words stayed with me, not because they hurt, but because they mattered, even after everything, even after the distance. In his worst moment, he called me. I sat beside his bed and listened as the doctor explained what happened. A car, a late night, a mistake. James had been lucky. That word again. Lucky. When the doctor left, the room felt quieter. James stared at the ceiling. I thought I was fine, he said. I thought I didn't need anyone. I nodded slowly. I know that feeling, I said. He turned his head slightly and looked at me. I was angry at you, he said. For a long time. I know, I replied. I thought if I stayed angry, it would protect me, he continued. But lying there last night, I realized something. I leaned closer. I was scared, he said, and I wanted my dad. I didn't speak. I didn't trust my voice. I reached for his hand. Slowly, gently. He didn't pull away. That small moment felt bigger than any argument we'd ever had. Over the next few days, I stayed at the hospital as much as they would allow. I slept in a chair. I ate from vending machines. None of it mattered. Mark arrived the next morning. He looked exhausted, shaken. We nodded at each other, unsure how to speak after so much distance. Lily came later that day. She hugged me without hesitation. For the first time in years, the hug felt real. We sat together in that room, not talking much, just being there. James slept most of the time. And in that quiet, something shifted. Not magically, not completely, but enough. I noticed things about my kids I had missed. The way Mark checked the monitors like he needed to understand everything. The way Lily adjusted James's blanket like she had done when she was little. I saw how much they still cared. How fear stripped away distance faster than any conversation ever could. One evening, James woke up while we were all there. He looked around slowly. You came, he said. Yes, Mark said. Yes, Lily said. And then James looked at me. I didn't think you would, he admitted quietly. That hurt, but it also clarified everything. I should have been easier to reach, I said. He closed his eyes briefly. We all should have talked sooner, he said. There was no accusation in his voice, just truth. That night, after the others left, I stayed with him. He asked me about his mother, about things I hadn't talked about in years. I told him stories I had kept to myself. Stories about fear, about grief, about mistakes. I didn't try to sound strong. I tried to sound honest. When he fell asleep again, I sat there thinking about how close I had come to losing him, how fragile everything really was. Distance suddenly felt small compared to absence. The next morning, I stepped outside the hospital and breathed in cold air. I realized something important. Waiting had nearly cost me everything. Space is important. Boundaries matter. But silence can also become a hiding place. And love, real love, doesn't hide forever. As James slowly recovered, conversations started happening. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. We talked about the past without turning it into a courtroom. We talked about the future without pretending everything was fixed. I didn't try to reclaim authority. I tried to offer presence. And for the first time, that felt like enough. But the story didn't end there. Because healing isn't a moment. It's a process. And the truth that would finally change my life hadn't been fully spoken yet. That truth would come later. When I learned why James had been driving so late that night. And what he had been carrying alone. Healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with truth. I didn't understand that until I sat beside my son's hospital bed and realized how many things we had never said to each other. Not because we didn't care, but because we were afraid of what honesty might take away from us. James stayed in the hospital longer than expected. Not because his injuries were life-threatening, but because something else had been fragile long before the accident. Something that didn't show up on scans or monitors. At first, our conversation stayed light. Weather, food, small memories that felt safe. We laughed once, briefly, about an old camping trip where everything went wrong. That laugh felt like a miracle. But beneath it, I could feel something waiting. One afternoon, when the room was quiet and the sunlight fell across his blanket, James asked a question that changed the direction of everything. Dad, he said, not looking at me, do you ever feel like you failed us? The question wasn't angry. It wasn't accusing. It was tired. I took a slow breath. Yes, I said. More than you know. He nodded slightly, like that answer made sense. I didn't want to ask you that, he said. But after the accident, I realized I might not get another chance. That sentence made my chest tighten. I leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, searching for the right words. I failed in ways I didn't understand at the time, I said. I thought doing the right things would be enough. James turned his head and looked at me carefully. You did a lot of right things, he said. But you never asked if they were the things we needed. That was the truth I had been circling for years. I was scared, I admitted. After your mom died, I didn't know how to fall apart and still keep you safe. He swallowed. I didn't know how to fall apart either, he said. So I got angry instead. We sat with that for a while. Two men, separated by years of misunderstanding, finally standing in the same emotional space. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. I wasn't driving late that night because of work, he said quietly. I felt my stomach drop. Why were you driving? I asked. He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. I was running, he said. From what? I asked. From myself. He told me about the nights he couldn't sleep, the pressure he felt to prove something, the voice in his head that told him he was never enough. He told me about how anger became easier than sadness, how distance felt safer than disappointment. I didn't think you wanted to hear any of that, he said. You always seemed so tired, so focused. I closed my eyes. I wanted to hear it, I said. I just didn't know how to ask. That was the moment I realized something painful. My kids hadn't been hiding from me. They had been protecting me. James wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I blamed you for a long time, he admitted. But lying there in the car, I realized I was also angry at myself. For what? I asked. For wanting you, he said. For still needing you. That sentence shattered something inside me. Parents don't talk enough about how much they matter, even after children grow up. We tell ourselves independence means absence, that being needed means we failed to prepare them. But that's not true. Needing doesn't disappear with age. Later that day, Mark came back to the hospital alone. He asked if we could talk privately. We sat in the hallway, the smell of disinfectant filling the air. I didn't come sooner because I didn't know what to say, he said. You don't have to say anything, I replied. That's the problem, he said gently. We never said anything. He told me how pressure followed him everywhere, how being the oldest made him feel responsible for everyone else's emotions. I felt like if I struggled, it would break you, he said. So I stopped sharing. I thought about how proud I had always been of his strength, how I praised his independence without seeing its cost. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, I said. I know, he replied, but it happened anyway. There was no anger in his voice, just sadness. Lily joined us later. She sat between us, holding both our hands. I think we all learned how to be quiet, she said, because we thought quiet was kindness. She was right. We had mistaken silence for peace, endurance for love. That night, after they left, I stayed alone in the room with James. He was awake, staring out the window. I was scared to tell you I was struggling, he said, because I didn't want to disappoint you. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. I wish I had told you how often I felt like I was disappointing you, I said. He turned toward me. You did, he asked. Yes, I said. All the time. We looked at each other, both surprised by that shared truth. Sometimes the wall between people is built from the same fear on both sides. Over the next days, conversations deepened. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But honestly, we talked about grief. About how losing their mother shaped all of us differently. I admitted how lost I felt back then. How I mistook control for stability. They told me about the moments they needed reassurance instead of advice. Comfort instead of correction. None of it erased the past, but it softened it. One evening, James said something quietly that stayed with me. I didn't crash because I was careless, he said. I crashed because I was exhausted. That word echoed in my mind. Exhausted. From carrying things alone. From pretending. From staying silent. I realized then how much exhaustion runs through families when no one feels safe enough to be honest. When James was finally cleared to leave the hospital, we stood together outside. The sky was pale. Cold air filled our lungs. This doesn't fix everything, Mark said. No, I agreed. But it starts something. Lily hugged me tightly. Don't disappear again, she said softly. I won't, I promised. And for the first time, I understood what that promise actually meant. It didn't mean controlling. It didn't mean hovering. It meant staying emotionally available, even when it was uncomfortable. As we drove away, I realized the accident hadn't brought my family back together. Honesty had, but the hardest part was still ahead. Because knowing the truth doesn't automatically teach you how to live differently. That lesson would come later. In quiet moments. In new mistakes. In learning how to speak before silence settles again. And in understanding that love is not proven by how much you endure, It's proven by how much you are willing to feel. People talk about healing like it's a moment, like something clicks into place and suddenly everything makes sense again. But healing isn't a moment. It's a practice, and practices are messy. When James came home from the hospital, nothing looked different on the surface. The same streets, the same houses, the same quiet mornings. But everything felt unfamiliar. I wanted to do everything right. That was my first mistake. I checked in too often. I asked too many questions. I tried to fix things that didn't need fixing. Old habits don't disappear just because you recognize them. James noticed it first. "Dad," he said gently one afternoon, "you don't have to manage this." I nodded, embarrassed. "I know," I said. "I'm still learning." He smiled faintly. "So am I." That became a kind of unspoken agreement between us. We would learn together. Slowly, Mark stayed in town longer than he planned. He worked remotely from my dining table, his laptop surrounded by coffee mugs and old mail. Sometimes we didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Other times, conversation came unexpectedly. One evening, he closed his laptop and said, "I never knew you felt lost after Mom died." I looked at him. I didn't know how to say it, I replied. He nodded. "I think we all learned how to survive without asking for help," he said. That word again. Survive. Survival had shaped us, but it hadn't taught us how to live together. Lily called every day after James came home. Not long calls. Sometimes just 5 minutes. But her voice sounded lighter, more present. "I don't want us to go quiet again," she said once. "Neither do I replied. So we started setting small habits. Nothing dramatic. Weekly dinners. Not mandatory. Not perfect. Just time. The first one was awkward. The food wasn't great. The conversation wandered. But we sat together. And that mattered. There were setbacks. James missed a dinner without calling. The old anxiety rose in my chest. I almost sent a long message. Then I stopped. He texted later. "Bad day. Needed space." I replied, "Thanks for telling me. I'm here." That was it. And that felt like progress. Mark struggled in quieter ways. He didn't talk about emotions easily. He never had. One night, after everyone else left, he lingered in the doorway. "Dad," he said, hesitating. "I don't know how to do this part." "Which part?" I asked. "Letting you see when I'm not okay." I swallowed. "I don't know either," I admitted. "But we can try." Trying became our new language. Lily was the most open. She always had been. But she carried her own wounds. "I felt like I had to be strong for everyone," she said one afternoon while helping me wash dishes. "I didn't want to add to your sadness." I shook my head slowly. "You were a child," I said. "That was never your job." She smiled sadly. "Kids don't know that," she said. That sentence stayed with me. We started talking more about their mother. Not just the loss. The life. Funny stories. Small habits. The way she sang off-key while cooking. It hurt. But it also connected us. I realized how much I had avoided those conversations out of fear. Fear that grief would break us. Instead, it softened us. Not every day felt hopeful. Some mornings I still woke up with regret pressing heavy on my chest. Some nights I lay awake, worried about saying the wrong thing. But I didn't hide anymore. That was the difference. I told them when I felt unsure, when I felt scared, when I needed time. And they told me the same. One afternoon, James admitted something quietly. "I still get angry sometimes," he said. "At you. At myself." "That's okay," I replied. "Anger doesn't disappear just because we understand it." He nodded. "But I don't want to run anymore," he said. That mattered. Mark admitted he was exhausted from always being the responsible one. Lily admitted she was tired of being the peacemaker. And I admitted that I didn't want to be the silent pillar anymore. We were all tired of roles we never chose. Healing didn't erase the past, but it gave us room to move forward without carrying it alone. I learned something important during that time. Staying doesn't mean hovering. It doesn't mean fixing. It means being emotionally reachable. It means answering honestly when asked how you are. It means listening without planning a response. I failed sometimes. Old instincts resurfaced. But now, someone would gently point it out, and I would listen. One evening, we sat around the table long after dinner ended. No one rushed to leave. Mark leaned back and said, "I didn't think this would feel possible again." "Me neither," Lily said. James looked at me. "I didn't know I could feel close to you without feeling small," he said. That sentence told me everything. Connection doesn't come from authority. It comes from safety. As weeks turned into months, life slowly resumed its rhythm. They didn't come over every day. They didn't call constantly. And that was okay. What mattered was that when they did reach out, it felt real. I no longer waited in silence, hoping. I lived in the present. The house didn't feel full again, but it didn't feel empty either. It felt open. I understood then that rebuilding isn't about returning to what was. It's about creating something new, something honest, something fragile enough to be real. And that fragility scared me less than it used to, because I had learned that silence does more damage than truth ever could. And staying, truly staying, means choosing presence even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. Even after James came home and our conversations began to flow, there was one memory that refused to fade. One night that had been empty, silent, and cold. The Christmas night when no one came. I had tried to forget it, told myself it didn't matter, that it was just another holiday. But as the months went by, I realized that night was a message I hadn't understood until much later. That morning, I woke up early as usual. Coffee brewing. The smell of pine from the artificial tree I had decorated with more hope than skill. I had baked cinnamon rolls, expecting someone, anyone, to sit at the table with me. But no one came. Hours passed. Lunch passed. Dinner passed. By nightfall, the house was completely silent. I sat alone, staring at the decorations, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. It was a silence I could not escape. Not because there were no voices, but because I had built a wall so high between me and my children that their absence felt permanent. That night, I realized I had been waiting for a miracle, waiting for my children to read my mind, waiting for love to come back automatically. It didn't, and it couldn't. I had misunderstood what family meant. I thought it was about routines, presents, meals, and traditions. But family is about presence, attention, vulnerability. The night wore on, and I finally accepted that my kids were somewhere else, living their lives, growing apart, protecting themselves from a father who didn't know how to feel deeply. It hurt. It hurt in a way I had never allowed myself to feel before. Not anger, not resentment, just raw, quiet grief. I sat in the living room, surrounded by unwrapped gifts and half-finished decorations, and for the first time, I really looked at my own reflection in the dark window. I saw a man who had tried to be strong, a man who had thought strength meant endurance, a man who had believed that love was about showing up materially rather than emotionally, and I realized I had been wrong. I thought I had given my children everything, but what they needed most had been my attention, my presence, my willingness to feel alongside them. That night became a turning point I didn't recognize until months later, because it forced me to sit with myself, forced me to confront the ways I had failed, forced me to admit that love isn't something automatic. It is something earned every day through listening, understanding, and showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. I began to see patterns I had missed for years. The small moments where I could have asked more, listened more, held space more. The times I chose silence over empathy. The times I mistook being calm for being caring. And in that realization, I found clarity. Christmas night wasn't a punishment. It was a message, a chance to see what I had ignored, a chance to confront myself before it was too late. When James called that fateful morning months later, it was like a bridge had been thrown across the chasm I had created. That call, combined with the months of reflection, helped me understand that love sometimes requires breaking your own patterns. I had been afraid of vulnerability, afraid of being questioned, afraid of being imperfect, and in that fear, I had distanced myself from the people I loved most. Looking back now, I can see the small signs that night, the empty chair by the table, the untouched gifts, the way the living room felt too large and too cold. They were telling me something. Be here, really here, before it's too late. That night taught me humility. It taught me that love without effort is only hope. It taught me that presence matters more than perfection. I spent the hours afterward reflecting quietly, not plotting how to fix it immediately, not imagining angry conversations, just sitting with the grief and understanding it. And that understanding prepared me for the phone call that would come at dawn, prepared me for the hospital room where James lay recovering, prepared me to finally listen. Truly listen. I realized that Christmas night, alone, wasn't a failure. It was a lesson. And sometimes, lessons come in the form of emptiness. Because emptiness teaches you to notice what really matters. After that Christmas night and the hospital ordeal with James, everything changed. Not instantly, but gradually, in ways that were almost imperceptible at first. Healing isn't fireworks. It's slow. It's small gestures repeated over time. It's proving through presence, through attention, that you can be trusted again. I started by learning to listen. Truly listen. Not waiting for a pause so I could respond. Not thinking about advice or correction. Just hearing them. Their words, their pauses, the weight behind what they were saying. James was the first to notice. He still flinched sometimes when I asked questions, but he began opening up. About work. About friendships. About the guilt he carried from the accident. Guilt he had tried to manage alone. One night, sitting in the living room with him, he said quietly, "Dad, I never thought I could trust anyone again." I swallowed hard. "Trust isn't automatic," I said. "It's earned every day, and I'll do my best to earn it." He smiled faintly. "That's all I need," he said. Mark and Lily were more cautious. Mark had spent years suppressing vulnerability, so he would come over, sit in the corner, and keep busy while quietly watching us interact. But gradually, he started sharing little things. Frustrations at work, embarrassment about mistakes, even small victories. Lily became the heart of our household again. She reminded me gently that connection isn't only about words. It's about small acts, making dinner together, helping each other fold laundry, sitting silently with a cup of tea and letting the silence exist without judgment. We created rituals. Sunday dinners, even if short. Weekly calls, even if brief. Moments that didn't carry expectation, just presence. One evening, James was talking about his fears of failing at work. Normally, I would have jumped in with advice. This time, I just nodded. "Tell me more," I said. He spoke for nearly an hour. No interruptions. No corrections. No lectures. At the end, he sighed. "Thanks for listening," he said. I realized then that listening was the greatest gift I could offer. Not money. Not gifts. Not even words of wisdom. Just attention. Presence. Patience. There were setbacks. I forgot sometimes. I raised my voice too quickly. I misread moods. But instead of stepping back, I admitted it. "I'm sorry," I said more often than I expected. And slowly, that humility was mirrored back to me. One Saturday, we decided to clean the garage together. It was messy, dusty, full of old memories I had tried to ignore. At first, we argued over what to keep. We argued over what was junk. I almost lost my patience. But then, Mark laughed at an old trophy he found, the one I had completely forgotten about. Lily found an old photo album. James dusted off boxes I didn't even remember storing. By the end of the day, the garage wasn't just clean. It was full of laughter, of stories, of shared memory. It was the first time in years I felt like a real family again. We took walks together, short trips, coffee runs, moments that seemed insignificant to anyone else, but were monumental to us. I started noticing things I had missed before. The way James smiled when he felt understood. The way Mark relaxed when he didn't feel judged. The way Lily's eyes sparkled when she felt seen. And I realized something important. The past doesn't disappear. The mistakes, the regrets, the years of distance, they stay. But they don't have to define the present. Trust is rebuilt one small step at a time. And every small step matters more than a grand gesture. I learned to ask questions differently. Instead of, "Why didn't you do this?" I asked, "How did that make you feel?" Instead of, "You should have handled it this way," I asked, "What would have helped?" And slowly, the walls we had built began to crumble. There was a moment, one quiet evening, that marked a shift I will never forget. We sat together after dinner. No one was rushing off to work. No one was distracted by a phone. We were just there. James laughed about something trivial. Mark added a sarcastic comment that made everyone chuckle. Lily teased me gently. For the first time in years, it felt effortless. Not forced. Not cautious. Just family. I caught myself thinking, this is what I was missing all along. Not perfection. Not control. Not discipline. Just presence. And then, I realized, the accident, the silence, the Christmas night alone, they had all led to this. To a family willing to try again. A family willing to rebuild trust. It wasn't over. There would still be moments of tension, misunderstandings, setbacks. But the foundation was different now. Stronger. Built on honesty, vulnerability, and patience. I began to see my role differently. Not as the authority. Not as the fixer. Not as the silent provider. I was a father who listens. A father who admits mistakes. A father who stays present even when it's uncomfortable. And that presence mattered more than anything else I could offer. As the days turned into weeks and months, I noticed small changes. The distance that had felt permanent began to shrink. The laughter returned. The conversations returned. The love, real, honest love, returned. I finally understood. The past cannot be changed. The future is uncertain. But the present, the way I show up today, is where real healing happens. And I promised myself that I would never take that for granted again. Even with the slow rebuilding of trust, I quickly realized that connection isn't linear. It doesn't move in a straight line from broken to healed. Sometimes, progress comes in steps forward, then two back. Sometimes, it's quiet, almost imperceptible, until one moment suddenly reveals how far you've come. After James returned from the hospital, there were days I still saw the tension in his face. The way he braced himself before answering a question. The way he hesitated before sharing a thought. I understood that it wasn't just fear of me. It was fear of being vulnerable after years of holding everything inside. One morning, he came into the kitchen quietly. "Dad," he said, I'm sorry for shutting you out all those years." I froze for a moment. Not because I wasn't expecting it, but because I wasn't sure what to say. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry too," but the words felt too small. "I know," I said finally. "I'm sorry for the ways I wasn't there." He nodded slowly. I think I've been angry at you, but also scared of myself." That confession stayed with me. It struck me that forgiveness is never just one-sided. It's a conversation, a recognition that everyone carries their own weight. Later, Mark joined us for dinner. The conversation turned to old family memories, mistakes we had all made, words that had hurt without meaning to, and slowly, laughter began to break through, tentative but genuine. Lily spoke softly, looking down at her hands. I realized we've all been holding on to things we didn't need to, things that only made distance grow. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "and the only way to change that is to let each other in, to accept what's been done and move forward." We started practicing forgiveness, not as a single grand gesture, but in small ways. Apologizing for misunderstandings, listening without judgment, recognizing each other's pain, and choosing empathy instead of resentment. It wasn't easy. There were times when I slipped back into old habits, snapping at James for minor things, raising my voice at Mark when frustration took over, feeling impatient with Lily when she asked for attention. And every time, I had to stop, reflect, and apologize. "I'm sorry," I said more times in those months than I ever thought I would. I didn't mean that. I shouldn't have reacted that way. And slowly, those words became powerful, because they weren't rehearsed. They were honest. And honesty builds trust faster than perfection ever could. One afternoon, James shared something I will never forget. He told me about the accident, not the physical injuries, but the emotional exhaustion that had led him to drive late that night. "I was running from myself," he admitted quietly. "I didn't know how to carry it all." I held his hand in silence. Words were unnecessary. I only needed to be there, to show that his vulnerability wasn't a burden, but an invitation for connection. Mark and Lily joined later. We spoke about the ways we had misunderstood each other, how our assumptions, fears, and pride had built walls. And as we spoke, I realized that understanding and forgiveness go hand in hand. You cannot forgive fully until you understand, and you cannot understand fully until you listen. We cried together, not out of anger, not out of sadness, but out of relief. The relief of finally sharing what had been bottled inside for years. After that night, our home began to feel lighter. The tension that had hovered over us like a shadow began to lift. We joked more freely. We teased each other gently. We shared meals without silence filling the gaps. It wasn't perfect. It never will be. But it was real. And real is better than perfect. I started to see my children differently. Not as extensions of myself. Not as reminders of my mistakes. But as individuals carrying their own burdens, struggling to find their own way. And I realized something profound. Love isn't just about giving. It's about receiving. About acknowledging the hurt you've caused and accepting the hurt you've been given. And most importantly, it's about being present enough to witness the repair. One evening, we sat together by the fireplace. The room was warm. The lights on the tree reflected softly on the walls. We didn't speak for a long while. Then James broke the silence. "Dad," he said, "I don't think I ever understood how much you cared. Not until now." Mark nodded. "I think we all feel that way, but we didn't know how to say it." Lily smiled, her eyes glistening. "And now we can." I realized that forgiveness isn't just about erasing the past. It's about creating space for new memories, moments that matter more than mistakes. And as we sat there together, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not the absence of problems, not the illusion of perfection, but the quiet assurance that, despite everything, we could be a family again. That night, I understood that life's most important lessons are not taught in grand moments. They are taught in silence, in vulnerability, in the willingness to stay, even when it's uncomfortable. And I promised myself, once and for all, that I would never take this fragile, hard-earned connection for granted. Because understanding and forgiveness are not one-time gifts. They are daily choices, and choosing them is the only way to truly stay. Time has a quiet way of revealing truth. It doesn't shout. It doesn't knock. It simply moves, and if you pay attention, you notice what it leaves behind. In the months since that fateful Christmas night and the accident, I've learned more about myself than I had in decades. About love, about family, about the fragility of human connection. I wake up now and hear the hum of life in our home. Not the silence that once pressed against me like a weight, but the soft, persistent rhythm of people living, loving, and existing together. James is stronger now, not because he avoided mistakes, not because life suddenly became easier, but because he knows he doesn't have to carry everything alone. Mark has learned to let his walls down, to accept that being responsible doesn't mean being perfect, and that vulnerability is not weakness, but courage. Lily, always the heart, reminds us to pause, to breathe, to notice the small moments that truly matter. And I have learned my most important lesson. Being a father isn't about control. It's about presence. Not being perfect, not having all the answers, just showing up, emotionally, mentally, and fully. I think about that Christmas night often. The emptiness, the loneliness, the quiet ache of absence. I understand now that night was never a punishment. It was a mirror. A chance to see the distance I had created, a chance to confront the parts of myself I had neglected. I realized something profound. Love doesn't guarantee closeness. Effort, presence, and honesty do. And so, every day, I make the choice to show up. Even when it's difficult, even when I'm tired, even when old habits try to pull me back into silence. Because connection is not something that waits patiently for you to arrive. It must be nurtured continuously. I remember sitting quietly one evening, watching the three of them laugh over a shared memory. The kind of laugh that comes from feeling safe, understood, and loved. And I understood how fragile that moment was, how easily it could have been lost. And I realized that what we had rebuilt was not just our family. It was hope, faith in each other, trust in the idea that love, even when fractured, can be repaired. I have also learned that silence can be dangerous. Not the peaceful kind, not the reflective kind, but the silence that grows from fear, pride, or avoidance. It isolates. It separates. It teaches regret. I've made mistakes, countless ones, but mistakes are only permanent if you ignore them. I've learned that apologies are not just words. They are actions, a willingness to change, a demonstration that you notice the pain your choices have caused and are ready to do better. We still have disagreements. We still stumble. But the way we stumble is different now. There is accountability. There is patience. There is understanding. I think about my kids when they were younger. The moments I didn't understand them. The times I was absent, even when physically present. And I forgive myself. Not to erase what happened. Not to diminish their pain. But to finally allow myself to show up without the weight of guilt stopping me. I think about them now, not as children, but as the remarkable, resilient people they have become. And I am proud. Not because I raised them perfectly, but because I stayed. Because I chose presence over pride. Because I chose love over fear. I know life will continue to challenge us. There will be disagreements, setbacks, unexpected sorrows. But I also know that connection is not measured by perfection. It is measured by effort, by willingness, by the courage to remain present even when it hurts. Sometimes, I still wake up early and sit with my coffee, staring at the empty chair at the table, remembering that night. And I smile quietly, not from relief alone, but from understanding. Because that night, lonely and cold as it was, taught me everything I needed to know about love. Love is not silent. Love is not absent. Love is present, even in imperfection, even in exhaustion, even when it is difficult. I have learned to be patient, to forgive, to listen, to stay. And I have learned that staying, truly staying, is the greatest gift you can give to the people you love. Now, when I see my children, I see all that they are. Not the mistakes of the past, not the anger of distance, but the joy of survival, resilience, and shared understanding. I have learned that life's most important lessons do not come from grand gestures. They come from showing up, from sitting in silence, from speaking honestly, from holding space for each other. And I carry that lesson every day, not as a burden, but as a promise to myself, a promise to my children, a promise that love, when nurtured with patience and honesty, can endure even the darkest nights. Because family is not just what you are given, it is what you create, with courage, with presence, with love. And I will never forget that lesson. Even when life tests us again, even when fear whispers to retreat, I will stay, I will listen, I will love. And that, I have learned, is enough.